Welcome back to worship with the Presbyterian Church in Westfield, New Jersey. This week we're wrapping up the third week of a sermon series on the Sermon on the Mount, specifically on Jesus' view of the world being utterly flipped on its head. What Jesus sees when he sees the world is something so different from what our typical understanding ever is. What Jesus is viewing and understanding is a world in which compassion rules, a world in which love is the leading force in all of our relationships. And it all comes to a point today where we begin to understand how much brokenness there is all around us in life. And where there is brokenness, there is an opportunity for us to push back against conventional thinking and conventional wisdom, to become part of the reconciliation of the world by healing what is broken. Join us today as we dive into this beautiful sermon, this beautiful landscape of the kingdom of heaven being spoken by Jesus himself. Welcome and worship with us. Thank you.
This is holy ground. Heaven is upside down and flipped. The seven king is crowned. Power is different now and then. God's kingdom comes about. Love flipped. Love turned inside out. Love no matter what. Love no matter what. Love turned inside out. Love no matter what. Love flipped right side out. Love no matter what. Flipped. Love no matter what. Flipped.
So our reading today is, again, from the Sermon on the Mount. And at this point, we've already heard of the Beatitudes. We've heard now of Jesus' introduction to the sermon, where he tells his followers that they are salt and light for the world. And now he starts really digging into his message that love is the world at work in the full reality of what God's will is. And he shows in different examples ways in which this gets broken and what is required of us. On the surface, it sounds like we are to go beyond the law, which is, something that does show up in this sermon. But if we listen carefully, we can see Jesus drawing or reimagining our very day-to-day relationships. Let us listen to what he has to say. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not murder," and "Whoever murders shall be liable to judgment." But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, "You fool," you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown in prison. Truly, I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. Friends, this is our word of good news for today. Jesus is, I think, having us question conventional thinking. And if the conventional thinking on his own sermon is that it either has to be perfectly followed or go to the other extreme and be almost ignored, but be a reason for us to be grateful for God's grace, there's something wanting, I think, in both of those readings. I think Jesus is giving us an opportunity to start thinking about the way the world could be and our place within it. Instead of it being rules, I wonder what else Jesus is doing. So I invite us all to kind of go back in to the scripture reading here and begin to unfold it just a little bit. See, what about the four elements in this reading that are so similar to what he continues to go on and on and on for the rest of the sermon? What's common here? What starts to come up to the surface? He starts off with what we call in rhetoric or in debate a diatribe. He says, you have heard it said that you shall not murder. And then he goes on to say, you can't even get mad at people. And if people are mad at you, you have to go get this thing sorted out as quickly as possible. You go work for the reconciliation immediately. Drop everything. Don't even make an offering to God until you've made up with your neighbor. Now, this is really important language. Jesus is saying, in effect, that the quality of our relationships with each other has a direct bearing on our relationship with God. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that because I think this is at the heart of what Jesus is up to. The way in which we relate with each other has a direct bearing on the relationship that we have with God. So if you are angry with someone else, or if someone else is angry with you, drop your offering. Don't even finish doing what you're doing at the altar of God. Drop everything and go make things right. And then he goes on. Almost as quickly as he started, he's off to the next topic. And he starts off by talking about adultery. This sin in the Ten Commandments that is about coveting, about wanting something that's not yours, but also of being so flippantly willing to break promises that you've had made to somebody else. Now we're getting another version of this. Again, it has to do with our relationships and how our relationships or broken relationships have a bearing on our relationship with God. But now it's even more egocentric. Now we're starting to get an image or a glimpse of relationships where the other person has now been objectified. So that the relationship now has to do with what you get out of it. And again, Jesus moves on. And in the third of what we heard today, we hear about divorce. The breaking of something that is sacred, something that is sacramental in the way that we work as human beings, that all relationships are holy. But now the relationship that we have deemed as people of faith to be our most sacred relationship being broken. I think it's important to be able to note here that there are times in which I believe that people can be better apart. There have been times where we have discovered as the church and as people of faith that very tightly held beliefs about what it means for marriage to be sacred have been broken. And I want to take that very seriously as we talk today, that some of the traditional ways that we've understood the role of divorce as being all in or all out have been problematic. In situations where people have been abused, obviously, we can be better apart. But I think what Jesus is really talking about is actually in some ways trying to protect, in some ways, the member of the relationship, or the person in the relationship who held the least power. He starts off, you've heard it said that husbands should give their wives a certificate of divorce. The idea behind this was that the wife could then go show that she has been freed of that responsibility and is able to marry again. But he takes it deeper. He talks about a breach of the spirit, a breach of the soul that takes place when we break that relationship. Again, it's very short, and he moves on to finally talking about you've heard it said not to take your oaths lightly, not to take your vows lightly. And he warns almost of our inability as people to ever uphold our vows, to ever be able to uphold the promises we make or oaths that we take. And I think this is really important because one of the most important themes in all of Scripture, from the very beginning all the way through Revelation, is that time and again, God and humans have a relationship established. And time and again, we break the relationship, and God is the one to uphold it. If we go back to Abraham, even in that story, there are a couple of covenants, there are a couple of relationships that are established between God and Abraham. And the pattern that we see is that even though I don't think necessarily Abraham is breaking them, Abraham doesn't trust fully the promises made during those covenants. And in the very same token, time and again, God establishes relationship with the people, the whole nation of Israel. And time and again, the people break those relationships. We make vows and we break them. And Jesus warns us here in this sermon of our inability to maintain and keep our oaths. So he says, just make it a yes, yes, no, no kind of situation, because where you are right now and your ability to make promises is really weak. I'm going into all of this in order to say, I think that Jesus is questioning our conventional thinking. I think he's also demanding more of us, and not demanding more by the letter of the law. I think even though this is all dressed up almost as a letter of the law, following of rules in order to be a person of faith, really I think it goes so much deeper than that. This is a story of Jesus trying to show us a world that could be possible if lived purely by compassion. So what I'd like to do is, in the second half of this kind of reflection that we're going through, I'd like to go back over each of these, anger and adultery and divorce and even the promises we make and the warnings that he's given, and reframe it, not by rule following or going beyond even the rules, but now being freed by those rules and freed of those rules to live in a completely different way, one in which our daily living is not so much about us, but how it is that our relationships with each other are related to our relationship with the divine, with the holy. And it all starts with compassion. When Jesus warns us of the destructive power of anger, for example, He goes so far as to say, before you even make an offering to God at the altar, if one of your brothers or sisters, he says, so somebody else, has a problem with you, drop everything and go be reconciled. I think this is so important. It starts from recognizing not just where our personal hang-ups are, but where perhaps our own life, our own behavior, our own humanness has caused a breach or a divide. Something has been broken in a relationship. Jesus says, drop everything and go find healing. It leads first with compassion. Having enough compassion for this other person to actually be bothered that they are bothered. One of my favorite quotes, and I admit too often it rolls through my mind at times, is from Coco Chanel, the famous designer. Or at least it's attributed to her. And it is flippant, and it is dismissive, and it is terrible, and yet it's hilarious. And he goes something like this: I don't care what you think of me. I don't think of you at all. I think that statement gets at the very heart of what Jesus is trying to name as conventional wisdom and is trying to overturn. That when someone has a problem with us, it should bother us deeply. When someone is angry with us, it should bother us deeply, because it points out that there is a break in a relationship and there is an opportunity to show and extend compassion. And I believe it's the same way with both the underlying within adultery, the underlying within divorce, within even our ability or inability to make and keep promises, at the very heart of it. When Jesus speaks of an adulterer and says, if you've even looked at another person wrong, you've already committed adultery in your heart, saying it's not all the act, it goes beyond the act. What is going on inside of you that is breaking down your own ability to maintain relationship with the person you've promised to make a relationship with? Why would you seek to break that? It's because we get in our own way so often. We get in our own way and the pettiness of this life takes over. And all of a sudden, all that we are concerned about is us. Our own fears, our own hurts, our own weakness, our own needs. And we break something holy. And the same then goes for divorce. And the same then goes for even the warning to make promises at all. When I hear Jesus speaking in this sermon, it starts out feeling so negative. You've heard it said, but I say to you, take it further. Or follow it even more keenly, or puts it in almost into more black and white. But this may not be the most helpful reading for us. In fact, when I hear these words, even though my mind even goes to these warnings of Jesus, what I see over and over again, be it from anger or adultery or divorce or even just breaking of promises, where there is a broken relationship, there is room for us. There is space for us to care enough to do something about it. I don't think I have much more of a reflection for us than to stop and ask, what are the relationships that feel broken? What are the relationships that feel as though they've been stretched and strained? What are the relationships of hurt that need the opportunity to be heard and healed? Because the degree of brokenness and the relationships that we have with each other reflects directly on the relationship that we have with God. Amen.